What's up, guys? Nate here from Protoculture and Shadow Chronicles, and today I want to take a look at a synth from Plugin Alliance. This is DS Thorn. I want to take a look at some of the unique features that make this a bit of a standout synth for me. We're going to do a very, very quick overview of the GUI and the signal flow for the synth. For the most part, it resembles most sort of current modern VST synthesizers that are on the market, but there are some cool little twists along the way that we'll cover afterwards. So let's basically just look at the overall GUI for the plugin, what's on offer. So up at the top, standard procedure, we've got our voice modes: poly, mono, legato, tuning. There's a handy little D-click thing here that will cut out some of the transients from the oscillators if you're getting clicking sounds and things like that. Legato, our patch browsers up at the top here, and a panic button. So moving through the rest of the synth, a 3 oscillator synth, plus a 4th oscillator, which is a noise oscillator. Running through the harmonic filter, which we'll come to in a sec. Our multi-mode filter section. Drive controls, you can run this in parallel or in series. Currently its default state is to run in parallel, where you can set the routing of your oscillators to whichever filter you want. You can also input the output of filter 1 input into filter 2, so you can run them in series. I have a limiter and our master volume. The low cut is just in the rare instance that you might have DC offset, you can low cut that off. The boost will apply a boost to the lows and the tops, just to the perceived loudness will be increased slightly. We have this section in the middle. Our mod matrix lives here. You don't necessarily have to set up the mod matrix the old-fashioned way. What you can do is add modulation sources just by right-clicking on any of the controls that you want to modulate. Let's do oscillator volume, for example. We can add modulation and just select any one of the envelopes or modulation sources that we have there. So that's a really nice, quick, easy way to program. And you'll see as soon as you do that, it pops up in the modulation matrix, and then you can either use a right click to click on the control and drag the amount. You'll see the depth amount changing there. Or you can do it the old-fashioned way, come into the actual mod matrix and edit whatever needs to be edited there. But yeah, I think this is more just so you can get an overview of what is being modulated where. But it's much faster to just do it with the right click. There is also another option for setting up your modulation routings, is to actually just drag from these outputs. You have drag and drop functionality that you can drag onto any target that you need to modulate those. So very simple to set up. We have the effects section, 3 pages of effects. We have 9 effects in total, all pretty standard fare that you'd expect to see on most synths these days: delays, reverb, EQ, compressor, etc. They can be freely reordered just by clicking and dragging those little tabs, and turned on and off as such. Let's move down to, or move on to the arpeggiator. So you have quite a good arpeggiator here with quite a bit of options. You can use the standard, let's enable. Let's grab a default preset. So that's the standard sort of arpeggiator that you would normally expect. You can actually change the note values for each segment or each step in the sequence. So you can actually do sort of more complex sequences by adding in different. You also have a gate setting, so you can actually make the gates shorter per step in the sequence. And you have a number of presets as well. Right, enough of that. That's also pretty self-explanatory, the rest of that. The glitch sequencer, we're going to skip over this and come to this in just a second, because this is one of the sort of standout features in this synthesizer. Around the bottom, all our modulation sources, an amp envelope, 2 standard ADSRs, both can be affected by velocity, sensitivity, or key tracking. We've got two LFOs here, again, pretty self-explanatory, except for the poly and mono modes. This essentially, the poly mode will re-trigger a separate LFO for each note, whereas the mono, if notes are playing at different times, the LFO will stay in sync, which we can demonstrate a little bit later. We've got two other more advanced envelopes here. They can run in two different modes. You have a curve mode, which you can drag out, and by right-clicking, add curves. You've got a couple of cool little tools, a tension tool just to kind of shape it a little bit more. There's a shuffle for adjusting the timing for shuffling if you're doing slightly more rhythmic envelopes like that. It can be looped and one-shot, and you also have a step mode. You switch it into step mode, and you can adjust steps accordingly and assign that to any parameter you want. And we have two of these. So that's it for the modulation sources. Let's move on to the oscillators, because this is where things get a little bit different. So initially, you may be forgiven for expecting this to be a sort of standard wavetable synthesizer. In a sense, it is. You do have different wave shape slots that you can scroll through by using the position dial, much like you would in a standard wavetable synthesizer. However, these are not deriving their wave shapes from sampled material. There's no bank of waves. These are being generated by harmonics. So it's a spectrum synthesizer. So to illustrate this now, if we can click on our oscillator shape, you'll see what's happening here. Each one of these bands is a harmonic, and you generate the waves by affecting the balance of the harmonics content in the waveform itself. So just to illustrate this, if we just remove all the harmonics completely, you'll end up with nothing. Let's go and add in a single harmonic, and you have a sine wave. And by adding more harmonics, you generate different waveforms. You can add in a little bit more upper content there, for example. Pull that down. So essentially, an additive synthesizer. You're adding harmonic content to the wave, not subtracting from it. So these do give you quite different sounding waveforms, especially when you combine it with the oscillator effects, which we're going to come to in just a sec. Let's reset this. Just go back to our standard saw wave. So the oscillator controls, we have a unison mode, up to 8 voices, detune. And a spread control. The trigger mode, you have gate, which will start all the oscillators at the same phase point, which often give you a much tighter attack. The free mode is much the same as any other sort of analog modeled synthesizer, where the phase varies from note to note. And the random mode will select random phase start points for each voice in the unison as well. So every single voice that's being doubled up for the unison mode will have a different phase point. So they create sort of quite nice, natural, sort of slightly more chaotic sounds. Let's move on. We have a sub oscillator for each, or a sub for each oscillator that we can dial in as well. So let me take this unison back off again. You have 3 different modes for the sub as well. And now we get to the oscillator effects, which are quite unique as well. And these, we have 2 different banks of these effects. The first section are the spectrum effects, which can be applied to the spectrum that's generating our waveforms. And then you have the real-time effects down at the bottom. And these will look a little bit more familiar. Like FM, for example, that will require an extra oscillator being added as well. PWM, pulse width modulation, and sync modes as well. So we can take a look at the oscillator effects quickly, and these essentially add sort of filters to the waveforms themselves to generate new harmonic content. So the phaser one, for example, adds sort of phaser harmonics to your waveform. There's a number of different effects that you can add. You can play around with those. I will say though that these are being applied to the FFT as they're generating the wave. So they are not the kind of effects that you'd probably want to be modulating. You do get some, you can hear there's some stepping in there. That's just unfortunately due to the delay that's incurred by using an FFT and generating these waveforms. So they're generally there for shaping. You could probably modulate these with a step modulator as well when you kind of want those steps, but they're not going to give you very smooth modulation. But let's move down to the time effects. These ones are a little bit different. For example, if we turn on our oscillator 2, let's just take out the harmonic content there, just put in one single harmonic to get a sine wave. Take down the octave, and then we can listen to the FM dialing in. So that's our FM. You also have a pulse width modulation, for example, that we can use as well. Cool. So that's our oscillator section. All the oscillators then pass through a harmonic filter, which further affects the generated waves. Now this works much the same way. If you click on the harmonic filter, you can filter out sections of the harmonics. You have a couple of different tools for adding just odd or just even harmonics, for example, and organ harmonics. And you have a free draw mode that you can create these filter patterns with. And this is then applied to our sounds. Let's just take a listen. We'll take turn up our unison slightly. Just use a wave. Let's do that. And we can apply the harmonic filter. So all these middle harmonics. So it's great for kind of generating sort of phaser-like peaks and stuff. You can get just from that saw wave, quite a vocal sound by sort of emulating vowels with the filter. Let's turn up our voices a little bit. So yeah, and then on top of that, you also have the ability to shift this filter around. So where we have a vowel kind of sound like that, you can stretch the filter out or shrink it back down. And then you also have a balance dial, which kind of acts like a tilt EQ almost. It'll shift in favor of the top end of the spectrum or in favor of the bottom. So yeah, those get applied post oscillator, and then it runs into the filter. And okay, let's move on to the glitch sequencer, which is the other thing that I really like about this synth. If we grab a little arpeggiator, let's just make a quick little sound here. We'll add a filter to this. Using envelope 1 for our our glitch sequencer works, it's also a sequencer pretty much the same way, but you have a couple of different effects that you can actually add to your sequence as well. You've got a repeat, and you can set up the amount of repeats. So we'll just draw in like a couple of random little repeats there. We've also got a sample rate reducer, which will add to a few little spots here. High pass filter. And yeah, let's take a listen to that quickly. That's without. Let's put our glitch sequencer back on. So you can get some really interesting movement with sort of sequence patches with this, and you can obviously change this independently from the arpeggio, the amount of steps, and the timing for this as well. And it can also be mixed in as well, so you don't need to have that completely. You can have that just affecting part of the signal as well. So that's a really cool little feature, especially for electronic dance music. I find this super cool for kind of generating movement in my sounds. So we'll take a quick look. That pretty much covers what I wanted to show you guys. I will take a quick look at some of the stuff I've been doing personally, just patches that I've been making. Like this, for example, using a little bit of the glitch sequencer, kind of a arpeggiated film score-esque kind of sound. So you got quite a nice warm sounding sort of arpeggiated bass sound there. We'll take a look at a few different ones. Let's take this for example. That one just using the subsaw, pretty simple patch. But using the bandpass filter in parallel with another filter as well. We'll take a look at the pads. Are really nice with this. This harmonic filter really kind of shines on pad sounds. Take another listen to one of those. So this one's using one of the MSCGs in step mode to kind of add a little bit of filter modulation to the patch. Then let's take a listen to this one. Just kind of like a guitar-esque sound that I did. Just gets really nice crisp tones out of this as well. Quite expressive as well. And down to stuff that's a little bit more experimental using the glitch sequencer. Like a little percussion loop. And of course we've got to throw in some acid sounds as well, just for good measure. Cool. So I think that without going too in depth into the effects and stuff, that gives you kind of a good idea of what you can do with this. It's a great little synth. It's very easy to program. As I said, just the right clicking with this. Very easy to set up your modulation, etc. And it just has a really different sound to a lot of the stuff that is available in the market right now, which is always refreshing, seeing as there's so many carbon copies of sort of virtual analog synths out there, which don't really do anything different. This one is a bit of a breath of fresh air, and I really enjoy programming with this. So I hope you guys get to check this out and play around with it. It's a lot of fun. And yeah, go check it out. DS Thorn by Plugin Alliance. Cheers.